Yeah, she did. So the Clapperthon's the biggest, best published, most published, where you could actually do something. So I might put the order books in with you guys at some point. Probably not this year, because ready for last year. Especially if we have an implementation, then the project for that can focus more on like finding people to use the system, like kind of the higher level organizational stuff. Yeah.
I don't think my point is I guess that whatever else you will think will not match what we find.
Oh, right.
You know what, in terms of monetary and like I don't think I should think about it here.
Yeah, that's for you.
But it would have to be really
no, not to quit, but just to build something aside. Because I think I mean, in a way, we're kind of like in a position and they're all ready to exit. We gotta shut it off. Once we have this, when I maybe get another chair or something. Yeah, we can show you.
No, that is. Yeah.
Very good.
All right, well, hi everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We have really exciting panel members today that are going to talk to you about non-financial use cases of blockchain. We're really looking forward to it at District 3. I do see a lot of unfamiliar faces. So maybe just to know the crowd a bit more, who here is coming to District 3 for the first time? Okay, perfect. And who here is working on a blockchain startup? All right, interesting. And I know that there are some of our students at District 3 that are working on a blockchain project. And one of the speakers is going to be Pascal Leblanc. So we'll tell you more about that. But to introduce myself, for those of you that don't know, I'm Khalil. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at District 3. I'm going to be your moderator today. And so the way we're going to function in terms of the agenda, the first 15 minutes, we're going to have each individual speaker who are going to introduce themselves and talk about what they do. We have a renowned researcher, Jeremy Clark, from Concordia University, who's going to explain to you what blockchain is for those of you that are not very familiar with it, and some of the potential use cases that are being used in the real world. After the introductions, we're going to be going through some of the questions that we prepared for the panel members, and after that we can take questions from you guys in the audience. Does that sound good? Okay, perfect. So, to tell you a bit more about our panel speakers, so we have Jeremy Clark, who's the assistant professor at the Concordia IISE. He was an NSERC Postdoctoral Fellow and an NSERC Canada Graduate Scholar at the University of Waterloo, where his PhD was awarded the university's gold medal. His research is focused on helping everyday users maintain their security and privacy on the web. This includes the use of and regulation of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. And Clark has also been featured in several media reports, including a segment on CBC Radio 1 that was heard across Canada, sharing his expertise on digital currencies. So please help me in welcoming Jeremy Clark.
Thank you. Works? Yeah, perfect. Should I sit somewhere?
You can stand.
Okay. All right, so I'm Jeremy, as mentioned. So I'm over here at Concordia. I worked on cryptography originally, and so then when Bitcoin came out, we were sort of excited about it. We were some of the first people to start doing research, so in the academic setting, looking at Bitcoin. So we started working on it in 2011, and then as we sort of transitioned from Bitcoin to blockchain, I kind of rode that wave as well. And so we've done a lot of research on blockchain, and at the end, I'll give you a few of our projects, and I'm sure during the question and answer I'll talk about it a bit more. The other thing I was tasked with is trying to tell you what blockchain is in about 3 minutes. So that's kind of a hard task, but I can probably give you the essence of what it is. Another thing I can mention is if you want to know more, you can come over to Concordia and take a course with me. So last year we offered it for the first time, where we covered Bitcoin, blockchain, Ethereum, fintech. This year it's going to be an online course. So if you can Google my name, you can find my course website, and it will just be YouTube videos and things like that. So you can look for that in the fall, and it's going to walk through all those topics. So that's if you want a deeper dive into the material. Okay, so what's Bitcoin? I guess if we were having a panel like this, let's say 20 years ago, we'd be talking about the digital revolution and how everything's going to be digitized, and it's going to be computerized, and instead of having stacks of paper, you're going to have a database, and the database is going to hold a bunch of entries, and if you want to find something, it's going to be really quick and easy, and if you want to share it with someone else, it's going to be really quick and easy. And there's no doubt that digitization brought a lot of efficiencies. I don't have to sell you on why digitization actually turned out to be a sort of revolution. But this digitization did create one problem, at least one. So one problem is a kind of political one. It's not really a technical problem, which is when you have a database, someone has to own it. Someone has to be the person that maintains it. And whoever the person is that maintains the database, they actually hold a lot of power. You don't always stop and think about the fact that they're a privileged person because they can turn off access to this to this database if they want, right? Think about MLS. If you bought or sold a home, you know, it used to be you had to be a registered real estate agent, and then they would let anybody do it if you pay a fee, and the real estate agents were mad, but then the consumers were mad when they couldn't access it. And so having databases is a kind of political problem, okay? So there's a lot of things, a lot of use cases where there's no clear natural party that's going to put up the database, both in the financial world and in the non-financial world. And so this is where blockchain can really make a contribution. With blockchain, what you do is instead of having a database and somebody runs it, what you do is you get all your participants, whoever would want to read or write from the database, you form a network between them, and they all get a copy of the database. And they can all read and they can all write to their local copy, which gets reflected around the network. And the kind of academic contribution of blockchain is how do you keep everything synced, right? How do you make sure that when you're looking at your copy of the blockchain now, which is a fancy term for the database, how do you know that when I look at it, I see exactly what you see? Or if I have a record that's written into the blockchain, that record is reflected all the way around the network. Okay, so that's the sort of core contribution of what a blockchain does. The other thing a blockchain does that's sort of exciting is you can write really strict rules about what can be written into this database. Okay, and not just rules about what a transaction needs to look like, but also you can write code so that whenever data comes in, it can sort of run code. It can some input comes in, you can write a rule for what should happen or an algorithm, and that will get executed against that input. All the nodes on the network are going to rerun that code and make sure that the result is correct. And when everyone agrees that this is actually the result of the code that you defined being run on this input, that this is actually the output, then it gets written to the blockchain, it gets reflected around the network, and so everyone has this sort of trusted output of this input. And that works, even if you could misrun the code, or maybe there's some malicious nodes that want to run it slightly different, or let's say some of the nodes go offline, there's all sorts of different faults that can occur, and it's tolerant against all of those faults. Okay, so it just executes. And there can be large amounts of money at stake, and it still continues to execute. So your incentive to cause this to miscompute can be very, very high, and it will still give you high assurance. Okay, so that's the kind of core difference between a database and a blockchain. Now, a lot of people will say like blockchains are kind of more efficient, right? They're efficiency play. You know, we're going to use a blockchain and we're going to make it things more efficient. But I want to emphasize that a blockchain is not efficient. Okay, it's super slow. For example, Bitcoin's blockchain, you can write 1 megabyte every 10 minutes. So think about a music file, an MP3 file. That's about 5 or 6 megs. So it would take about an hour to write, and just one MP3 file to Bitcoin's blockchain. You can make it a bit faster. Bitcoin is very conservative, but anyway, it's super slow. When you think about databases, you think of big data, right? So this isn't a solution for big data. I also, when I think about databases, I think of really complicated queries, right? Give me all the records of people in this age range, in this income range, who work in this location, and the database is set up so that it can answer that query really, really fast. Blockchains are super stupid. The only query you can do is give me everything. So that's why when you install Bitcoin for the first time, you spend a long time downloading the entire blockchain, because that's essentially the only query that you can make. Okay, so they're not a drop-in replacement for databases. You have to really think through, and sometimes you really have to sweat the details of, does a blockchain actually make sense in this context where I would traditionally use a database? But the one thing it does give you is this security or this validation. So every read or write to the blockchain is secure. Okay, it has integrity. You can rely on those results or rely on those writes being reflected across the network. Okay, so think of it as a super secure but super slow database, and that's kind of the best I can do maybe in 3 minutes of motivating what a blockchain is. So anyway, this panel is about non-financial uses. Actually, a lot of my research, I'd say 80% is actually on financial uses. So we have a big project with AMF, the financial regulator of Quebec, and we're looking at implementing decentralized order books and derivative markets and a few things like that. But we do have a few projects. So I had a student who looked at domain names. So let's say you want to go and you want to register a domain name. This was one of the first use cases. So after Bitcoin, there was an altcoin called Namecoin, and that was the use case. And we look at a few fancier things you can do if you use a fuller-fledged platform like Ethereum. Another student who's in the room is working on doing secure multi-party computation, which is a lot of crypto jargon for basically you have something you want to compute, and different people are providing inputs, and they don't want to tell each other what their inputs are. Okay, so they know their inputs. They don't want to tell the other person what their input is, but you want to have this joint computation on all their inputs. So you can use Ethereum in sort of interesting ways to provide some functionality, or any blockchain. It doesn't necessarily have to be Ethereum. Supply chain management, I have another student that's looking at it. So this is a classic example where there's no logical person to put up the database, right? If you think about the supply chain, items go across borders, so there's government involved, they go through rail lines, or there's different carriers, transport agencies are involved. It's a really complicated process. There's no one logical person who's going to put up that database. And so if you use a blockchain, then you can just have a network between all the different stakeholders, and they can all sort of trace these goods as they move around. The other thing I work a lot on is voting, and so in this case, it's kind of the inverse. We looked at voting, and lots of people are excited about it, but in my opinion, blockchain doesn't really solve that great of a problem for voting. There's even a rule that someone kindly named after me called Clark's rule, which is blockchain solves the 8th most important problem in whatever you're trying to do. So voting is definitely an example of that. If you're interested in the voting use case, come to CryptoFest. It's tomorrow, and I'll be talking about voting there. So that's it. I'll pass it on to Pascal or Vincent.
Yes, thank you. So next up is Vincent Gauthier. He's the co-founder of Catallaxy. He's a Bitcoin blockchain consultant and entrepreneur with almost a decade of experience in computer science, consulting, and entrepreneurship. He's the co-founder and product, technology, and consulting leader at Catallaxy, a center of expertise and consulting firm specialized in Bitcoin, crypto, and blockchain. Please help me in welcoming Vincent. So I'm just going to put up his slides.
So hi everybody. I have a lot of slides actually, so for 5 minutes I'm going to pass very quickly. But I think I'm going to mainly present myself. I'm going to present Catallaxy a bit and talk a bit about some projects we are working on, and mainly the non-financial aspect. So I don't know if you know Catallaxy or not, but we are a Quebec firm. So we launched Catallaxy 1 year ago with Francis Pouillot and other people, mainly from RCGT. So we are like around 10 people that are working on blockchain, distributed ledger, applied cryptography. So mainly what we are doing some consulting. We are building our own product internally, and we are working also with RCGT on the tax and audit aspect of cryptocurrency. So today I'm mainly gonna talk about the consulting and the product part, because there are the non-financial things that we are doing. So in terms of consulting, so we help navigate. We help the company navigate this ecosystem, so it can be very complex, and we have a great explanation of what is blockchain, and that was just the little part, the top of the iceberg. It can be very, very more complicated and difficult to really understand where is this value from this technology. Is it good for you? Is it which use case should you work on? So we help company to understand that. So mainly what we are doing now is a lot of understanding, education, a lot of due diligence. We put a lot of emphasis on due diligence and skepticism around this technology, because it's definitely not a good technology for every use case that people think about, and we are also working on some proof of value and proof of concept. So in terms of due diligence, that's one of the main things that we encourage companies to do right now. So we help them to understand this technology on different things in terms of business. Is this something that's going to bring value for your company in terms of technology? Where should you focus? What is it's evolving very, very fast. You know, it's an exponential change, so it's not necessarily smart to build something like right now. So we help them to understand that, to build a roadmap in terms of technology. There are many issues in terms of reputation, legal stuff, regulation. So we also help them with that. And if they want to move forward, we help them to create some team, and we put them in relation with some startup or with some people that can work on some interesting project with them. So if you are familiar with cryptocurrency in Quebec, so you know that there is a lot of interest around mining, especially around Bitcoin mining. So we are also helping companies to navigate that, so building a business case, putting them in a connection, helping them with for the tax and regulation and legal stuff too. On the more financial aspect, we are also doing the tax thing for cryptocurrency. So if you own crypto and you make some capital gain, if you're a company or if you're an individual, that's stuff the CPA and the accounting people can help you with. In terms of audit, recently we audit a fund to prove their investors that they own the crypto that they say they own. So that's definitely more complex than it seems to be. So we can help them to do that too. And something else that we have. So Arthur is not there today, but we are also the blockhouse. So it's a physical space. It's a bit like a district tree, but it's dedicated to blockchain. It's dedicated to crypto distributed ledger. So the place is now ready. So we are working with some universities and some students from Concordia. We are building some partnership with legal firm, with banks too, and others to come. And the idea is to have the whole ecosystem physically in the same place to create synergy. So we are gonna soon open the registration for startup, for individual, for freelance people. So working on blockchain. So if you're interested, you can talk to me, or you can talk to Arthur. So I will give you, I can send you the address, and you can reach them out. So that's it about Catallaxy. I'm gonna go very fast to present some interesting use case we are working on. So I'm gonna pass the blockchain definition. We already had one. So the thing we are very interesting at Catallaxy are those opportunity in terms of removing intermediary, new way to have a security system built at the periphery instead of a central database, increasing transparency linked with tokenization, this ability to create tokens that represent a digital good or a physical good eventually in terms of immutability and smart contract. So the one I'm going to talk more about is immutability, because we released like an API very recently. So if you were familiar with proof of existence a few years ago, was one of the first non-financial use case on top of Bitcoin. So this ability to leverage the immutability of the Bitcoin blockchain to put some proof on this ledger. So definitely was like a few years ago and was like one proof for one transaction. So that's something that doesn't scale very easily. So now there is a new protocol like open timestamp, like Chainpoint, that allow you to scale that off blockchain and to settle it regularly on the blockchain. So that's what the API is doing, for example. So that will allow you to timestamp the thousand of document or email or whatever you want to timestamp almost instantly, and to put that in the Bitcoin blockchain every 10 minutes, so that you can leverage the security and the immutability of the blockchain, but yet scale almost indefinitely what you want to timestamp. So that opens the door to many interesting use cases. There is a demo working for one file, and if you are using the API, you can automaticate the whole process. So that opens the doors for some use cases around auditing, around patents. So you can prove, for example, in 10 years that you were the first to have these ideas. It's more and more recognized in courts recently. In Chinese courts, recognize proof in the Bitcoin blockchain as having a legal value, last will, testament, land registry, and so on. So many interesting use cases. So that seems very small, and this is a very small blocks, but what you can build on top of that is very interesting. Now we are working on integrated digital signatures that will allow to make links between some people and identity with what is a timestamp. So that's a splitted blocks that's gonna be able to create some very interesting use case. And something else we are beginning to work, and what's gonna be a main effort for the coming months is everything related to traceability and supply chain. So this is something I was working on before Catallaxy, and now there is a big momentum around that. So tokenization, so leveraging the ability to create some tokens that people can really own. So in the sense that if you transfer the token to someone else, you don't have the ownership of the token anymore. So those are very interesting properties. So in terms of reducing corruption, having a more trustless process, verified provenance. So that's something that we are gonna put a lot of effort in the coming weeks and months. And there are other projects we are working with the customer, but we can't necessarily talk that much about it. So that's it for the non-financial project. And as Jeremy mentioned, there are also some financial projects, but today it's about non-financial. Yeah, I think was the last slide. Good.
All right, thank you, Vincent. So last but not least, we have Pascal Leblanc. He's the founder of Mantle Technology. He's a blockchain strategic advisor for EY and is the founder of his startup Mantle Technology, which provides virtualized blockchain solutions for enterprises looking to rapidly deploy maintenance-free, scalable applications. Please help me in welcoming Pascal. I'm just going to put up the slides for you.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Pascal Leblanc. Before giving a stab to what we're doing at Mantle, I want us to get to know each other a little bit more by talking about me. So basically, I'm a serial entrepreneur in the blockchain space since 2011. I've made a couple cool stuff. I already sold 2 companies before starting Mantle, and I've been spending the most part of the 2.5 last year with Ernst & Young, one of the largest consulting firm to make blockchain strategy for our current clients or future clients that came because of those strategies. And with those 2 paths of experience, which are the startup experience, but also the corporate experience that you gain alongside a huge company like EY, you connect many more dots than you would usually if you would stick to only one of those paths. And pretty much that dot connecting experiment is what brought Mantle here. So, first of all, yeah, blockchain. So, I want to break it down super easily in terms of benefits of the blockchain. So, instead of talking feature or how it works, I want to be able to pinpoint 4 of the technical innovation that blockchain brings to the table. So here they're laid out. You have the mathematical validation, where instead of knowing the integrity of your data at the moment you enter it with procedures like it's happening today in the database world, you can make that validation cryptographically at the moment of read without any efforts. For the first time in history, and this is not valued enough, I believe, but for the first time in history, it's possible to have digital data that is immutable, non-duplicable, and non-alterable. It is a huge deal by itself, because before, if you wanted to have the notion of something authentic, like this is the Mona Lisa, this is a copy, that's the notion of authenticity, and in the digital world, it wasn't possible before blockchain. So everything that comes with authenticity is huge. And then the other huge problem is the interoperability and the synchronization problem, where when you had multiple different systems, they could be desynchronized. And this was and is still today a huge problem by itself. So those are all innovations that blockchain as a technology helped tackling those huge problems that revolutionized how we can take a different approach for those age-old problems. So those are examples of high-level use cases where blockchain can bring a lot of value with high feasibility today. So in terms of record keeping, so the data, digital data storage and exchange. You have everything, yeah, authenticity and certification. So how do we recognize this is the Mona Lisa? So the equivalent of that in the digital world. And then, yeah, everything that has to do with ecosystem. We hear it all the time. We need a blockchain for we're launching the pot coin for cannabis amateurs, and we're launching that new currency for people to crowdfund that new corner store that will sell special coffee. So all about the ecosystem collaborativity. And then you have the digital market, so the price and all those billions of dollars that has been created. So those are all use cases that are highly disruptive. Those are not the only use cases that blockchain can bring to the table, but those are the ones that are highly disruptive and are ready right now to be developed with blockchain. Because, yeah, as we see, blockchain has many perks, and blockchain has many pros and cons. But the thing and blockchain is unique in many ways. But after all, it's another emerging technology, and like any emerging technology, you need to climb that adoption curve, which can be steep or less steep, depending on the company, how they work, the enterprises, and depending on how the innovators that are gravitating around that makes it easier. And here to showcase a little bit what I mean by the adoption of new technologies, I want to make a parallel with the web. Okay, so this is the web today. Most of the efforts for a developer that wants to build a website or a payment platform or that wants to sell stuff online can go on Kijiji and can go use PayPal. So you don't need to worry about neither the infrastructure, neither the protocol, because they can host all their stuff on AWS and they can use Shopify to handle all their payments and their marketing. So those are infrastructure and protocol layers that are hard to build and that lets the sharing of information happen. But the thing is, what makes what you're trying to build unique and makes it different than what something else does is the application part. And this is the easier part to build, and this is the one that captures all the value for your users. That's the one that people pay for. People wouldn't be paying more for your service or product if you'd be hosted on a Google Cloud Platform on AWS or in your garage. They wouldn't even know. If your payment would be handled by Shopify or Stripe or even any other company, they wouldn't want to pay more for that. They want to pay more because your website is easy to use, because your website sells coffee that comes from the country where they come or whatever. So this is where you capture value, and this is how you want your development effort to be to call the technology adopted. And as of right now, the blockchain space, being an emerging technology, is in that phase where most of the brilliant minds right now are working on infrastructure level still. They're figuring out how to make faster node, more transaction per second, which all those metrics. It's all plumbing related to when we talk of it in application, because as a developer or as an entrepreneur, you don't want to build something that does transaction per second. You want to build something that makes it easier for people to park, and you want to build something that makes it easier to connect to lawyers, or I don't know. That's what you want to do. You want to build benefits. You don't want to build features, or you don't want to build metrics. So at the moment, most of the brilliant minds are working on infrastructures, but they're also working on the protocol level, where like they just mentioned earlier, they're using timestamps. So there's a new way to save better those transactions. Instead of making one per transaction, you can group them together, and this is the efficiency of the protocol level. Once again, this is not an application. Saying you're saving 10 stamps per transaction is not an application. That's still a technical feature. So to make a new technology easier to adopt, those layers has to be easy enough that developers that want to build around the technology focus on the application layer. And that's pretty much what I said. And plus, no matter how hard you're working, the technology is still going to evolve. So if you're spending all your time on the protocol, you'll be late at some point, because new infrastructure will be out. So, and there's thousands of infrastructure right now out there, and it's growing all the time, because like I mentioned earlier, most of the brilliant minds are working on new infrastructures and new protocols. So this is definitely why we went for Mantle. Pretty much with Mantle, we're the first instance of a blockchain hypervisor, or the virtualization of blockchain networks, where we can work with one or multiple infrastructure at once to make it easier for you to build your application, and it makes it abstract difference between public or private, because you're dealing with virtual stuff. And just like the cloud has been adopted, it's through virtualization, because you can reduce the cost by sharing the infrastructure with more people, but people are not connected to you, because let's take Bitcoin, for example. Bitcoin is an infrastructure that a lot of people use, but most of the transaction in the Bitcoin, or for Bitcoin transaction, they're not used to put any other data. Vincent was mentioning they use it to a timestamp. If it was easier to get there, there would be more timestamp, and it would be cheaper to use it, because instead of having to have the whole infrastructure just for that, you could have a more versatile infrastructure where you could share with different use cases. You will have timestamping, you will have your gardener, the timesheet of your gardener and your housekeeper on this also, and it would share the cost between all those participants. More scalable, and the concept of using virtualized network or anything virtualized it brings something that you couldn't see before in a blockchain, that is a decentralized technology. And with the decentralized technology, the governance was more often decentralized also. And with the virtual blockchains, you can have that hybrid where you have the benefits of a decentralized technology with the benefits of a centralized governance. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we're just going to set up for the panel discussion. I'm going to turn off the screen over here, and we'll bring the chairs. And so I'm going to go into the questions that we prepared for the members, and then after that, we'll take your questions. Yeah, so we'll just bring it a bit closer. So. Say this is the way you have it. There we go. All right, so can you come a bit closer? Actually sit over here and I'll take this. All right. So logistical setup. So I'm going to pass on the microphone, so I'll keep it with you, Pascal, and then you guys, depending on who wants to answer, you guys can answer. So maybe just to start off the conversation, why don't we ask a simple question about, maybe sharing a personal anecdote about how you first heard about blockchain and how you decided to get involved. Who wants to start with that question?
You don't Okay. Yeah, so when, blockchain comes from Bitcoin, right? So what we really heard about first was Bitcoin. So Bitcoin was posted to a cryptography mailing list when it first came out. And it was a mailing list I paid attention to, but I have to tell you that the number of people inventing new digital cash schemes was like, it happened once a month. And almost all of them were garbage. And so it took the community a while, I'd say maybe a year plus, to really take Bitcoin seriously and think, okay, there's actually something here that's different, that's a core contribution. And so at the time I was working in cryptography, but I was working in a different aspect, actually on voting. And just an interesting sort of anecdote is that I was working with someone, his name was David Chom, and he actually invented digital cash, crypto cash, in the 80s. So he wrote the first paper in 1982, and in 1981 he wrote about cryptographic voting. And so he had a company in the 90s, it was called DigiCash, but it was not decentralized, that was the core difference. So even Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin, compares himself to Chom's digital cash scheme, and when trying to highlight the differences between the two. So anyways, because I was working with him on voting, and then Bitcoin came out and it seemed like it was serious, I just started looking at it, and the first application we had was actually to voting. And then, I just got hooked. Didn't know that you could make an academic career working on Bitcoin at the time. I just did it because it was fun, and here I am today.
Great.
So I think it's, I heard about blockchain first when the word blockchain didn't exist, I guess, because it was through Bitcoin, so it was a few years ago, so I heard about some random forum, because you can do some interesting stuff at the time with the currency. So that's how I get to know Bitcoin. And when I came to Canada, so it was like almost 6 years ago now, I had the chance to meet some interesting people here that was doing some stuff with Bitcoin. So I hang out with them, and after the Bitcoin embassy opened, so we were allowed to hang out with more and more people doing stuff with Bitcoin. So I got very, very on too. So first was, even if my background is computer science, was really the financial ideas, this decentralization thing, how you can create money without central bank, how we can create money that is censorship resistant, even from any government. So that was this idea first that gets me into Bitcoin, but after that I look a bit more on the technical thing, on the computer science part, and I get very, very interesting. And after there was like the term blockchain was more and more popular, and I look on the non-financial application of blockchain. So before Catallaxy, I used to work for an exchange, but also I used to work for supply chain thing using blockchain and certification thing, and that's really what interests me now and what we're working on at Catallaxy.
Instead of saying how I heard of Bitcoin and where it comes from, I'd already share with you the first time I bought Bitcoin, because most of the time, yeah, this is a great anecdote. So I was, I don't know, 6 months in my readings of Bitcoin, following the price and seeing what people what people thought of it, and I decided to take the jump, to take a little bit of cash from the bank. Went on local Bitcoin and met with that one guy in a coffee shop on Saint Denis, and we were both there with our laptops, and he was counting the bills on the table, and his phone rang, so he answered, and he was a strange kind of guy with like hoodie, bald head, with like tattoos on his bald head and like tattoos on his fingers, and like people started looking us crooked a little bit, and then he started counting the bills, and then yeah, his phone rang, answers, and then while he's on that phone call, a second phone rang, so he answered it, and on one hand it was I don't know who, and the second on the second line it was his girlfriend, I guess, or I don't know, and believe me or not, by the time he finishes the call with his girlfriend, because the other one was like waiting, but with only his phone on mute on one ear and talking with his girlfriend on the second one, a third phone rang. But he also picked up. And yeah, I bought my first Bitcoin, and people were looking at us like we were, I don't know, drug dealers, or we were like people from the mafia doing some sketchy stuff there, and with those $20 bills on the table in a coffee shop and our laptops. People were, yeah, they looked at us. They looked at us.
Okay, great. So I mean, this is a great story. I mean, I remember back in 2011, even when people were considering Bitcoin, it was something shady along those lines, where you have to go to this place. There was this like negative public perception about what blockchain and Bitcoin is. You know, the perception was it was drug dealers or people using it for shady things, and so that discouraged a lot of people. But we see now how the public discourse has evolved over the past 5 to 6 years. Where, you know, back in December there was a huge high of everybody talking about blockchain, Bitcoin. It's going to be huge, you know, and I mean, it's something similar to what happened in the 90s in the internet, where people were talking about certain applications that were going to be deployed, and they thought it's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, but it actually took much longer than that. So, you know, maybe there's going to be some similarities that we can compare between how the internet came about and how blockchain is. But that leads to the second question that, you know, I want to ask it differently than instead of saying, you know, what the conceptions are about blockchain. I'm going to ask it differently. So, what's the question you are most tired of hearing on the subject of blockchain, and what would you like to say about it so you never have to answer it again?
I'll start, and this is going to be dumb. So yeah, people that comes up to me and say, no, your blockchain stuff is wacky because of quantum computing, and then they have nothing else to say. And quantum computing is faster. Could be faster once it's deployed, and could harm the state of today's cryptographic algorithms that are used on blockchain networks. But it's exponentially faster to create a harder algorithm than to create a better hardware to break those algorithms. So it's just like saying with the computing power today, it would be easy to crack Enigma back in the Second War. And yes, it's true, but it's exponentially easier to make those formulas than to create the machine that Turing made during the war. So that's my answer. It's easier to create better algorithms and to just update it.
Yes, there are so many questions I'm about to add. I mean, it's mainly related to the financial. That is the crypto side. It's more like where should I invest? I heard about this coin is a new thing. Should I invest on it? Is this ICO the best? Or like I heard like, you know, this new coin is infinitely scalable, so it's gonna replace Bitcoin or whatever. So I don't know what is the answer, but usually I just say no. And when you see invest advice, I just say, you know, necessarily if you're asking this question, you should not invest on this crypto, and probably not invest in anything. So yeah, that's the main thing. Is usually it's like for investment advice is necessarily I think personal work. You can, you know, come with you know, some question if you already do some your work, and for the technical thing too, but definitely I will say, you know, not necessarily yes or no, it's about investment, but, you know, really do your homework and try to really understand the thing where you are going to put the money, if it's an investment, or the money from your company, if it's to work on a blockchain project or whatever. You know, don't rely too much on other people's advice, because when we see that what's happening with ICO and new projects that are able to raise, you know, $200 million overnight, so you can imagine that with this amount of money, you can have like a big marketing team working very hard to make you believe whatever they want you to believe. So really be a bit skeptical on this world. There is a lot of noise, there is a lot of hype, so definitely it's hard to navigate. So skepticism and truly, you know, like verify by yourself the information, and especially if you want to invest your own money.
I guess as someone who teaches, I have a high tolerance for questions, and so almost nothing really frustrates me. I think of them as teachable moments, but I certainly don't give investment advice. That's one thing that's... the other one that's kind of annoying, it's not so much like who is Satoshi Nakamoto. That one's actually interesting. You can have an interesting conversation. Are you Satoshi Nakamoto? I'll answer that. The answer is no, and that's a frustrating question.
Okay, that's great. So, leading up to the next question, so some experts are talking about the fact that blockchain will be irrelevant in the next 10 years. And will there be a technology that can be developed that is more effective than blockchain? And what would cause blockchain implementation to succeed or fail in the next few years? I know, like Pascal, people mentioned quantum, like computing, but maybe we shouldn't talk about it. Realistically speaking, in your opinion, do you think that something in the next 10 years can come about where blockchain becomes irrelevant? Is that a scenario that we can foresee or not? And what do you think are some of the factors that can come into play? Or if you don't have to answer first, if somebody else wants to.
As Jerry mentioned, no, I have a good version. Yeah. As Jerry mentioned, and wanted to make clear that blockchain is not an efficient technology in terms of speed, and is less reliable than database for many things you have to do. So in those regards, you need to go on the other benefits of blockchain, the ones that I listed, and when it comes to immutability and solving the synchronization problems and all those I would say that you would have to look at the technology on that angle to see if a better technology becomes better to become immutable. And immutable is like binary, is whether you can delete it or you cannot. And it's at the point where it is immutable. Blockchain is immutable. So can you do more immutable? And the answer is no. If something is immutable, it is immutable. So I don't think another technology is going to be more immutable. Maybe it's going to be cheaper, but maybe is it only going to be the evolution of blockchain? Just like the internet today is not the same internet it was 10 years ago, but still the technology of internet.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I agree 100% with Pascal. It's more about the definition. Originally, like blockchain was like chain of blocks. It's the ledger, so it's a result of some game theory, computer science, mining, whatever you want. The result of a very complex, decentralized process, and people they create this consensus, and this is this ledger that was called the blockchain, and now by extension, usually we call blockchain technology the whole thing. So. For sure, what we call blockchain right now, I don't know if it's gonna stay or not. It's more about specific implementation. So definitely there are some blockchain implementations that are going to stay. I believe that the strong blockchain like Bitcoin, probably like Ethereum too, are gonna stay in the public blockchain thing. The other one, I don't know, but it's definitely going to evolve. So what we're going to call Bitcoin today, what we're going to call Bitcoin in 10 years and in 20 years probably is going to be different. We see that recently, there was some change at the protocol level, so now we are talking about changing, the signature. So it's evolving, so the parallel with the internet is definitely true. Internet is still there. We were calling something internet 20 years ago. It's more or less the same, but it's more or less, different in the same time. But I definitely believe that, we are saying like as blockchain today is gonna be there in 10 years probably. The expectation we have are gonna be very different. That's what we're gonna do with in 10 years. But I think it's something that's gonna stay, at least in the case of public blockchain like Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with everything that was said. It's sort of a semantics game. If you think about, like, will we still have databases in 10 years? Yeah, probably. Let's say blockchain replaces every database. Well, blockchain is a database, right? So it's not like you really got rid of databases. And so things might be better than our current generation of blockchains. They're going to be based on the same principles, the same concept. So that concept isn't going away. We might change the words that we use to describe it. There's nothing really on the horizon that would prevent it. So quantum computing has been addressed. We have post-quantum algorithms, so that will take care of that. And I mean, there could be some sort of technological apocalypse where, you know, all electronic devices are deleted, which I kind of half mean as a joke, but it does serve as a reminder that blockchain is an internet technology. And if you don't have the internet, you don't have blockchain. And so if you're in a country, for example, where you don't even have reliable hydro or power, let alone internet infrastructure, blockchain isn't for you. So you do have to think about what it actually relies on. But as a concept, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Okay. And some people even talk about the network value in terms of like given that people are already using it and there's a huge amount of adoption, it becomes even harder to, even if there's a new technology that might come in, it might be harder to replace what's already taken effect.
Yeah, I agree. And the network effect of blockchain is actually what's sort of important. You can go through lots of use cases of blockchain. Like, I'll just give one example. So let's say that you want to do land deeds on a blockchain. So this has been proposed. So that's fine. Now, is land deeds on a blockchain better than land deeds in a database? Is it better than land deeds on paper? Maybe, maybe not. Okay? But where the real power of blockchain lies is the fact that not only can you have your land deed on a blockchain, you can have payments. So if you want to transfer that land deed, then the payment can be on the same blockchain. And who owns it, their identity can be on the same blockchain. If you want to do some sort of legal things with it, like say take out a loan, well, that loan could be on the same blockchain. If you want insurance, right, that insurance could be on the same blockchain. And so that idea of getting everything on the same blockchain, that's actually where it's most interesting. So on a case-by-case basis, it's not always clear that a blockchain wins, but when you get everything on the same blockchain, that's where it becomes interesting.
All right, so I have a question in terms of, like, you know, you see all these ICOs popping up about, you know, how blockchain can be applied. We can use it for XYZ purpose. But I guess the question is always the market timing. You know, is there something that you believe in the next year or two is already existent? Like you guys mentioned a few of the use cases. Is there some of them that you believe are already have some amount of adoption? Is it more at the protocol level as opposed to applications? Is there something that you guys can talk about in terms of specific use cases that could be applied in the next 1 to 2 years, like on a short-term horizon?
Sure. So this panel is actually on non-financial use cases. I think the financial use cases are the most interesting because they're 1 degree removed from Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the only real clear success case of blockchain that we have today. And so from my perspective, maybe I'm overly conservative, but if you get 1 degree removed, then that to me is the most interesting space. And the non-financial is kind of like 2 degrees removed, and there it's like a lot more kind of hazy. I'm not sure what we'll see in the next year. I think, so time stamping is actually a very interesting application that you can do today. I mean, there's nothing really inhibiting it. And a lot of it has to do with what Pascal said, is it's more the higher up in the stack, the tools that allow you to do it, the user interfaces and those types of things are kind of the hindrances. Key management, you know, who wants to hold on to private keys, and there's these little issues like that have to get sorted out more.
Yeah, I agree with you. The use case of blockchains are not financial. I agree with that. Most of the interesting use cases are financial or somehow linked with the finance thing. They are very, very narrow. So the example of time stamping is very good, I think. So when we are talking about creating a blockchain use case or blockchain application, we are not necessarily talking about putting the whole application on the blockchain, but just changing the parts. So ideally, it's to either increase the trust or remove some intermediary or increase efficiency of the process. So in the time of timestamping, for example, when we're talking about last will or this kind of stuff, so the idea is just to remove the part that the notaire, another company or someone else was doing now, and replacing it with, for example, something like the IPI or directly using Bitcoin or other blockchain to timestamp it there. So what I believe and what seems to be the direction of the market is, and more is going to be true, is to really use the blockchain for what it's good for, very laser focused use case, and build like probably the 90% of the application is going to be using traditional applications, and probably user, when they're going to use blockchain applications, they are not even be aware of there is a blockchain on the back. And so as of today, definitely, except Bitcoin is timestamping, there are some other technology like signatures, this kind of stuff. They are not necessarily blockchain per se, but they are close enough that people use it and work. For example, something like Keybase, where you can have like public directory and you can sign the thing you're going to timestamp before the timestamp. So you link your identity with the timestamp. So that's existing working actually. Was working before the blockchain, but now it's empowering by this technology. But yeah, outside of timestamping and maybe increasing traceability and transparency, I don't see like use cases are used as of today.
So I've been giving a stab at that exact question since I launched Mathol, because our number one value prop we want to bring is accelerate the adoption of blockchain, make it easier for people to build those blockchain powered application where maybe their user base wouldn't even notice that they're using a blockchain technology. And so far we've worked with a couple people, and from what we've learned, I have two insights for you in those regards. And the first one could look a little bit obvious, but it's all about legal tech. So digital signature. Why do I have to sign on paper? That's because there's law in place that says your support, your media support for that signature, that symbol of that person has to be persistent in time. And the thing is, a database or the way legal firms are storing their IT infrastructure is not as persistent as a paper, if they manage the paper correctly. So with blockchain, there's going to be a lot of revolution. The digital signature, versioning of 5 keeping, so everything related to an important file that you would want to digitize, so your will and some example we see the deeds maybe. The timestamping, but even a little bit deeper than that, the timestamping, but the identification of a change that could have occurred on that document once at the moment of read. Like I said earlier when I presented Mathol, one of the good shift in paradigm that blockchain-based example is you can validate at the moment of read instead of having to trust that it went through the correct filters before being registered. Just like in your bank account, there's a load of procedures to make sure that you can make that transfer, you can make that debit. But if somebody puts 1 million in your account, let's say I have physical access to the drive and I put 1 million in your account, it's going to be there. And once the other systems read it and tells you your balance, you're going to be at 1 million, even if it doesn't make sense. So at the moment of read, they won't know, because they assume that what's written has been through the right procedures. And that shift of paradigm can be applied to in the physical world and to humans. When you read a document, you want to make sure that was a document that you stored on your drive last week, the week before, and the year before. So legal tech is going to be one to ripe. Legal tech is an industry ripe to change and innovate with the blockchain tech. And another one that I want to spend maybe 20 seconds to talk about it is gaming. So we've seen a shift in gaming. I don't know how familiar you are with the gaming industry, but we've seen a shift in how gaming studios, they monetize their stuff. And since, I don't know, I would say since League of Legends, their marketing model where you make the game free and you sell purely aesthetic costumes to your client base, and that's how you monetize. And that's catching on more and more, and almost every game, war games, they have custom paints on your gun and on your knives, and any games now, it's more and more. I would say over above 80% of the games developed today, you don't pay for a disc or you don't pay upfront to have the game. You play for free and you pay for costumes and for non-advantageous add-ons in your game. And what I think blockchain would enable in that train of thought is the community would be able to create those add-ons and get paid for it, and the game creator would be a marketplace. You're going to have a cut of 30-40% if they accept your knife style. You create a special knife, and people can buy it, and you're gonna see freelancers, artists create content, add-on content in games in the future. And to make all this work, you need a blockchain to make this work properly.
Well, these are interesting use cases. So, you know,
it's not financial, right? Gaming is.
It's not financial. So, in terms of so that brings us to a question of, like, if I'm an entrepreneur or a startup and I'm looking to use blockchain technology for whatever I want to build, what do you think are the unique challenges that I might face as an entrepreneur that's different from any other type of tech that I employ?
I think there are many challenges, but probably a lot of technical challenge. But I think the two unique challenges that I see, and we talked about it a bit, they are linked obviously with regulation and law. So even if we are talking about non-financial use case, probably when we are working at least on public blockchains that are using tokens that have financial values that could be recognized as securities or not. So definitely that create new challenge that when we are working for a database or when we are working on AWS, for example, we don't have to think about if I receive or if I'm making a transaction, I'm making also payments. So what are the implications of that? So definitely there are different perspective to have. So thinking about the regulation, thinking about the implication in terms of flows that using a public blockchain with tokens that are value on top of it could have for the company or for the people who are working on, or even for the customer. And also one big issue, big challenge, and maybe it's true for other technology like artificial intelligence too, is the scarcity of people that are able to work on the field. It's very easy to find a good idea in blockchain, but it's very difficult to find people that would be good to implement this idea, and the market price is very, very expensive if you fund them. So the scarcity of people that are able to build stuff, I think it's a big issue, at least right now, and probably with the class and courses that's going to be solved in the coming years. But as of today, it's very difficult to find some skilled people in the field.
Yeah, so I'll say three things. The first thing sort of was said is for startups, you have to figure out that you actually need a blockchain, in particular compared to a database. And so a blockchain almost never gets you in trouble. You can use a blockchain instead of pretty much any database, and it's not like it's not going to work or something like that. It's just that it's doing something that's completely unnecessary, and it's not that efficient compared to a database. And so I often say, blockchains are sufficient but not necessary in a lot of use cases. The second thing is you do have to think a bit about how you're going to monetize whatever you want to do. A lot of blockchain applications that are really good applications of blockchain are about disintermediation, meaning you're getting rid of that central party. And entrepreneurship is sort of the inverse. It's sort of like you want to be in the center, you want everything flowing through you so you can make money off of it. So as a sort of thought experiment I often mention is, imagine if like Satoshi Nakamoto came to you and said, hey, I have this great idea, it's called Bitcoin, and explained it all to you and said, how can we make money off of it? Well, it's actually really hard to come up with ways to make money off of it that wouldn't actually just kill it, right? Like you could charge fees and that kind of thing, but then no one's going to want to use it, and Bitcoin would have never became Bitcoin itself, right? So anyway, so you do have to think a bit about what you're going to do in order to monetize. And then a lot of blockchain applications also turn into people problems, where what you need is, because there's no logical person to hold the database, you're going to use a blockchain instead, but you have to get all those parties on board, and you have to get them all writing into the same blockchain, the same smart contract, or whatever the case may be. And so a lot of these use cases is just traditionally, going around to different industry players, competitors, and trying to get them all to adopt the same technology. And that's not actually that different, right? You know, usually like the Ethereum contract you can write in a day, right? But getting people to actually use it, you know, that's what takes you a year or 2 years in order to do.
That was well said. All of you guys.
You don't have to add anything if you don't want to add. Well, great. That's a great response from everyone. And in terms of, you know, as a startup or entrepreneur, I mean, and this question is also to you a lot as well in terms of Mantle and what you guys are doing. You know, there's a lot of education that's involved in awareness. So, like, if you're looking and approaching clients, you know, how do you get them to actually use your product? Is this something that, you know, is something hypothetical? Like, how could they realize the pain point of, like, when you're talking to them, they're going to say, wow, we need it right now, and this is going to help us solve XYZ problem. So, like, in your opinion, what do you guys think is necessary for you to get your first people to adopt your product?
There's like two answers to that, because the first one is you can try to sell blockchain as a solution to what they are already experiencing. So you talked about the pain point. So blockchain will drop your AWS costs, or blockchain will make sure that your compliance department doesn't have any trouble with XYZ stuff, or blockchain will make sure that the cryptographic keys you keep for your client because you're a cryptocurrency business. Because those cryptocurrency business are not even using blockchain tech. They still have the exchanges. Most of the time, the problem is that all the field orders and the balance of users are in a traditional database, and this get corrupted or attacked. So, which is ironical by itself, I would say. But the thing is, yeah, if you're dealing with sensible data, so instead of so you can find the pain points, and the best way to answer pain points is in our the way we do it is we make products that instead of saying feature, they sell they are super laser focused on benefits. So we say this is more secure. This is you pay for a premium. This one is removes your synchronization problems. So you go in terms of laser focused benefits, because people don't look to build an application that can support 10,000 transactions per second. They're looking for an application that will make their user more comfortable of storing there, or that will allow their customer to sign digitally their contracts. And that opens the door to the second way, or the second path, where instead of enhancing what you're already doing, you are offering new stuff that are enabled by blockchain. So you have the process improvement, the PI process improvement, and you have the new opportunity that are enabled by blockchain. So just like e-signature, or so yeah. Let's stay in the legal take, and to showcase those two ways, you have the e-signature that are made possible with blockchain, and you have the compliance data storage, the client information compliance, which could work without blockchain and has worked before, but has been an issue before, and we've seen many data leaks, and we've seen many companies before pay fines because they got hacked. So you have like the process improvement where they could use blockchain to store more efficiently their users' data, but also that could enable them to give the control of their data to their users. Okay. So you have process improvement and new opportunities.
Okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Anything that you guys would like to add?
So, well, in the finance stuff that we look at, the two main features are lower fees and faster settlement times. This is for like trades, for example. You can think about Bitcoin, similar properties, and I think thinking about Bitcoin is actually an interesting way of maybe framing it. So you can probably just ask yourself the exact same question, which is, it's been over a month since I've made a Bitcoin transaction, and for a lot of you, maybe you've never made a Bitcoin transaction. Probably most of you aren't using Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis, even if you happen to hold Bitcoin. So why is that? Where's the pain point? Why is it that you're actually not using this technology? And there's lots of answers to that, like, there's nothing to buy with your Bitcoin, or you're terrified of losing your private key, and so you don't want to keep it on your computer, or you don't want to download the blockchain. I don't know what all the answers are, but anyways, the point is that this, to me, is a big open problem. This is something that we think a lot about, scalability from a technical standpoint. We don't think a lot about user scalability. How are we going to scale up the users of blockchain technology, and how are we going to bring people to the technology that are sort of out of the norm? They're not techie people, or they're not interested for other kind of reasons, political reasons, or whatever the case may be. So I see this as a big challenge, and I wish I had an answer to it, but I don't.
So in terms of, there's always this debate that always happens in the blockchain community between decentralized and centralized. And even for a non-financial use, do you guys see if let's say you guys are building a centralized blockchain, from what I understand, maybe virtual. Is there like how like Antonopoulos talks about the fact that if you're talking about blockchain, there's the concept of open source, and the fact that it's publicly available, and when you create a garden within a corporation, so to speak, that's applying blockchain technology, there might be issues with that. It's not really focusing on the properties of what blockchain is. So like these are all convoluted notions. I'm not very familiar with them, but maybe you can enlighten us and tell us more about what you think about that.
So when you mentioned that Antonopoulos is saying that the private, he's referring to public versus private blockchain debate, and this debate is the people working the community in those open source projects, working on those public networks that relies on everybody to work in the network to be existent and to be good enough. They don't like the idea of a private blockchain because there's less feature to it. So at the end of the day, the corporation that deploys its private blockchain has to pay to manage the infrastructure, and in the opinion of the public people, they think this goes against the point. If you have to pay for your own infrastructure, you're not decentralized enough. And the thing is, there's benefits to blockchain technology outside of being decentralized and being contributed by the community, which the data chaining, the immutability, the redundancy of that data storage. So I think there's benefits to use both, and it's going to be higher cost to run your private blockchain, of course, but in many, I would say most of the time, the enterprises that would go for a private blockchain instead, even if it's more expensive, is more political or ideological, their decision.
Okay.
It's more, they want to use their stuff, and it's more of a philosophy. Just like why the same thing with the cloud. There's a lot of companies that would rather pay 3 times the price and have like an on-premise IT team just to manage their infrastructure instead of being in the cloud. Most of the time in those kinds of choices in the corporation, it's more of a company culture and ideological of the management.
Yeah. So still on the public and private blockchain, just to clarify, I think the open source thing it's a bit different because some database they are by definition very centralized, and still they can be open source, and it's not necessarily the point that people are angry with. And I think historically at the beginning, in the community, private blockchain was seen in a very bad way, but now I think most people they understand that public blockchain like Bitcoin and private blockchain, like Hyperledger or whatever, they are completely different things. It's not a competition between them. They are answering completely different needs, answering completely different problem. So definitely there is not, you know, a bank that's gonna create a private blockchain that's gonna replace a public blockchain. They are supposed to do some different things. The question is a private blockchain something good for the use case they are trying to solve? So my understanding is like for the private blockchain, it's to recreate like smaller ecosystems that is a bit similar to the public blockchain, but inside a consortium. And the hypothesis is to say that inside this consortium, so for example 80 banks, as long as they are agree and they think that, you know, the data is immutable, you know, immutability is very relative concept, so it can be immutable for them, but, you know, not anyone else in the world will believe, you know, the data that is inside this blockchain. But as long as, you know, they are happy with that, you know, there could be a solution. The question is this the best tool to achieve these results? So that's not necessarily the case, and I think that reflects the importance to really think before going too fast on the technology. Because when we were talking about blockchain, very trendy, as Pascal say, some bank or some big institutions, they were not necessarily comfortable saying they are using public blockchain, so they switch to this private blockchain, thinking they are going to have the same benefits. But if they would have waited a bit and see how the technology evolved, now there is new concept like sidechain or this kind of stuff, where you can have, you know, a more private thing, but still, you know, leverage, you know, security of public blockchain. And probably in the coming months and years, we will see more and more of these solutions that will allow, you know, corporate and organization to keep, you know, control, to keep data private, but yet to leverage, you know, what's interesting about blockchain as mainly, you know, the security or the immutability. So I think the point is more to be very vigilant on this kind of project, to really time the market. Right now the technology is evolving so fast that it's not realistic to say that we're going to implement a public or a private blockchain today and we're going to work with that for the next 10 years. So it's more about thinking about the problems that we're trying to solve, and after, you know, waiting for the technology to be available.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I primarily like diversity. So I like the fact that we can choose between whether it's centralized systems or decentralized systems. Both of them have their benefits, or open systems or closed systems. There's pros and cons to both of them. And what I really like is having a spectrum of choice. And I think they interact with each other. They push each other around a bit. Like, to give an example, you use the parallel of open source, closed source. What kind of computer do I use? I use a Mac. Probably a lot of you use a Mac as well. That's probably one of the most proprietary, you know, closed companies in terms of their operating system. But the real reason I use a Mac is because sometimes I need to do serious work. And when I have to do serious work, I can open up a terminal and I get a Unix command prompt, right? And Unix is open source technology. It was, you know, Steve Jobs had it at Next, and then when he came back to Apple, he brought that into OS X. And so from that point forward, OS X was based on Unix, right, which was open source. And so even though it's sort of closed and it's proprietary, there's also this base of open source. And so none of that would happen if you didn't have companies like Apple pushing the proprietary model as hard as they can, and other projects like the BSD project pushing open technology as hard as they can. And so I think the blockchain space is sort of similar. I applaud anyone who works in the space, and if you're really pushing a closed private blockchain as hard as you can, a consortium blockchain, then that's great. And if you're pushing an open project like Ethereum or Bitcoin, then that's great as well. And I think you'll learn a lot from each other, and you know, having that agility to be able to move between those technologies and pick and choose. And it's not like you have to always use one or always use another, right? You know, maybe for some things you want to do it on Ethereum, and other things you want to do on Hyperledger. That's cool.
Great, so we have 2 more questions, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. I know it's a lot of insight. You know, I don't know for you guys, but I'm going to be researching a lot of the answers that they just mentioned, so I can learn more about what's happening. But I want to ask you guys, you know, the Peter Thiel question, which is, you know, tell us something that's true about blockchain that almost nobody agrees with you on. I know it's a hard question, so if you guys want to take the time to think about it, feel free.
I'm going to try and get rid of this as quickly as possible.
So I don't know really, but yeah, I would say that on my opinion, like in a let's say, in a Pareto fashion, I think at the end it's really like winner take it all, at least on the public blockchain way, in the sense that we are gonna go to see less and less blockchains are gonna survive. And I think the way it's work, and we are talking, for example, immutability, as Pascal say, that doesn't make sense to say this blockchain is more immutable on that one. That doesn't make sense to use the second most immutable blockchain, and that doesn't make sense to use the second most censorship resistant blockchain. So it's really a trend to go to one solution. So I believe in my case that's going to be Bitcoin, and that most of the applications are going to be built on the second level. So as we are saying for timestamping, for example, so we are talking about a protocol like Open Timestamp and other ones that are built options. There is a Lightning Network that will be allowed to scale on the transaction level, the session sync that are pegged into Bitcoin, and now there are even the possibility to create some smart contracts that will be somehow secularized by the Bitcoin blockchain. That will be like a settlement financially, but
oh, we're running out of batteries.
yeah. So that will be like a settlement platform for financial transaction, but also for any other technical use case. I know a lot of people disagree with this idea, but for me it's really like on the long term, winner take it all.
So are you saying that, for example, instead of Ethereum, within blockchain you would use like something like Rootstock to build smart contracts over it, and it would be one
Yeah, and eventually, the winner could be some. Right now, as of today, I believe it's Bitcoin, but Ethereum eventually. But also, as I said at the beginning, it's more in the 80-20% way. So not every blockchain are going to disappear. It's like 80% of the work, 80% of the transactions going to be done in some environment that's going to be very different of what we today. So there will be still, 20% that will be like other thing, but for the most masses, like the internet.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense to have like several internet competition. So there, the trend is going to be like one of the
All right, so I'm going to pass on this microphone between you guys if you want to answer.
My controversial statement of the day would be that Ethereum and all the decentralized application movement it has created over the past 3 years, the dApps, as we can see in the literature, is one misunderstood, but also not as game-breaking or important as we would think, because from where I sit, from where I see the dApps and how people want to use them is there's a huge difference between outsourcing your computing, so you have something that you don't need to process on your machine, and creating a dApp, a fully autonomous software that will live on the internet forever and couldn't be stopped and wouldn't belong to anybody. So this is the app by itself, and most of the advantages that people want to use dApps for would only be solved by being able to outsource your computing, because pretty much what the app is you write some piece of code and you want somebody to execute it whenever, and this is a different use case than making a decentralized application that would live forever and would belong to nobody and would be unstoppable. So, and I think in the future, unfortunately for the Ethereum creators and the Ethereum holders, I think better technologies for distributing computer load, so in terms of anybody's cloud to run your code in, because you don't care where the code runs, you just want it to run integrally. So new solutions will replace the Ethereum virtual machines, and Ethereum will stay for the dApp part, but I think it's less than 1% of what people are developing for today. And the ones that are using it, whenever a project starts to pick up a little bit, the network gets flooded. So they have those two main issues that will strike harder than ever when 99% of the developers will use those new offshoring of computing later on.
So I thought a bit about this. It's still a hard question. I don't think there's anything that nobody would agree with, but there's definitely views I have that I'm sort of in the minority on. Probably the most significant would be about the usability of blockchain, and so this is something that really concerns me. And I guess if I want to say it in sort of a controversial way, I might say that in 5 years, if you're actually using Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency, you're probably going to have an online wallet. So an online wallet is someone that's going to manage your cryptographic keys for you. And this is completely contrary to the vision of Bitcoin. And I've said this at Bitcoin conferences and almost got crucified because the whole idea of Bitcoin is you're going to manage your own keys. It's decentralized, right? You're never going to rely on a central point of trust. But I think the usability challenges are just too severe, right? You have this key, and if you have any significant holdings of Bitcoin, you lose this key, your savings are gone, right? If you get malware, and malware now looks for those keys as soon as it's installed, your savings are gone, right? You forget your laptop on a plane, and that's your only copy, you know, your savings are gone. You print it out on a piece of paper, that's great. You walk it past a camera gets a picture of the piece of paper, you know, your savings are gone. You know, I could go on and on, but this usability I think is very, very significant. And the reason that we don't, actually first off, lots of people use online wallets. What they'll do is they'll use an exchange because you have Canadian dollars and you want to get, say, Bitcoin, and you just leave your money on the exchange because now you have a username, you have a password. If you forget your password, you'll send a validation link to your email and you can reset your password. There's no password reset for blockchain keys, including Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. So yeah, I think if there was a reputable player, like say a major bank, that gave an online wallet, I would put my Bitcoin there. I mean, there's no way I would hold on to it myself.
Fascinating answers. So we have one last question, and then we'll open it to the audience. So one question I have. So one of my favorite sayings, I don't know if it was Naval Ravikant that came up with it, or it was Paul Graham from Y Combinator, but they talk about, you know, the future being already exists, but it's unevenly distributed. And there's also another analogy that in the startup world where, you know, back in the 70s or, you know, early on when the brightest minds were spending their free time working on something, and that was working on building computers. You know, these days we have smart people that are working on blockchain, and there's something about the way, you know, developers work amongst each other within that culture of blockchain. Given that you guys are already immersed in that world, is there any insights that you can see of like the way people work together as a result of blockchain and this culture that you see might be, you know, something that might be the status quo in 5 years from now?
All right, so you're not going to like my answer. I actually have a counterpoint to that. I think that what I see in the Bitcoin blockchain world is actually a lot of dysfunction that we don't normally see, especially in Bitcoin's case. I mean, there's no one's in charge, right? The founder who invented it disappeared, sort of gave repository access to other people, and we've seen these debates about scalability and block size and SegWit and all of this stuff, and there isn't a really clear governance structure that's in place. The Ethereum Foundation, you know, it actually has some governance in place. There's a clear, like, kind of creators of Ethereum, but even still, you have these controversies and these forks and these types of things. And so what's kind of new about this space is you're building technology that's supposed to be decentralized and kind of democratized. But in terms of developers actually working together and getting things done, and how are you going to decide whether you should do this controversial thing or not, and when should you fork and when you shouldn't fork? It's almost like because the technology is decentralized, there's this expectation that the governance structure needs to be decentralized as well, but then it doesn't work and there's no rules for it. And so I see it more as a challenge than sort of like novel, like kind of software engineering principles or stuff like that coming out of the blockchain space.
So I mean, maybe I guess it comes to the fact that we're human beings, and maybe the way we function is hierarchical, and perhaps, you know, like there has to be some leader or something in a group that allows people to work in a controlled fashion. So maybe that there's the concept of, you know, in an ideal world we would have a decentralized everything, but perhaps our human nature is more built towards, you know, centralized systems.
Yeah. So the one core thing about decentralization is you sort of have to be, to use a kind of sexist term, jack of all trades. You can be a chain of all trades. But you sort of have to know a little bit about everything, right? And so when it's decentralized, you're deciding every little aspect for yourself because there's no like sort of leader, there's no centralization of knowledge, right? So there's no expertise, there's no sort of technocrats that are sort of, you know, like if you think of democracy, decentralized democracy would be like direct democracy where everyone votes on everything. So you want interest rates to go up, instead of the Bank of Canada deciding, we're going to have a referenda and everyone in this room is going to decide about interest rates, right? Do you know a lot about interest rates? I don't, right? I wouldn't know how to vote. And so, yeah, so there are these sort of challenges where there's a lot of convenience that comes out of hierarchy where you can have expertise and specialization and not everyone has to know everything about everything.
Yeah, just to come back on what you said about the Bitcoin governance, on my opinion, I think it's really like a feature, and on this case, it's very unique. But I think it's, on my sense, is what is the most interesting. In the sense, is the fact that it's very almost impossible to make a change. And in my case, because we are talking about money, because we are talking about trust, and so it's a big trade-off. But in my sense, this governance that doesn't exist, it's almost a feature, and it's one of the most interesting one for this specific use case. But definitely, except this use case of creating a decentralized currency or decentralized trust, is not something that is recommended to use in a more corporate or different other project. And to come back on the original question, I will say what's interesting, what we have seen in the blockchain thing, and that could be maybe could not be a representative of the future. It's how the innovation is created. So historically, it was either in the university or in the company, and a project like Bitcoin is like almost creating out of nowhere. We still don't know who is the creator of it, and most of the innovation on the fields are not necessarily created by company, or they're not necessarily created by university. So definitely it's a trend that probably we're gonna see more and more, that these open innovations that create their own challenge and also their own opportunities. So that's definitely something that could be representative. And so we see that more and more when we try to hire people. It's like more and more, and especially for the new generation, it's like when they want to work on something, the idea behind it, what the use of the technology is going to be, it's very, very important. So it's more and more like a challenge also for human resource, and it's very critical in the blockchain work, and it's going to be probably more and more true for other technologies, that you know the use and the ideology between technology is more and more important for people when they're working. So those are, I think, maybe a representative of what we're going to see in 5 or 10 years.
I'm super happy of my co-panelist answers because they pointed to important facts, and those facts are also the drivers on why I went with Mantle and virtual blockchains. They said that there's lots, we all said that there's lots of benefits from the technology, but one of the impediments that comes out of those decentralized projects and all open source is the governance, and that's exactly what we wanted to tackle by making the being able to grasp the advantages of a decentralized technology, so the technology itself, but still while keeping the governance centralized, which just as Vincent mentioned it, is super important in a corporate setting and a governmental setting, and like our moderator said earlier, there's a hierarchical nature within peers, within people trying to live in community. So it's important to keep that in mind. And with the burdens of the private keys that Jeremy mentioned earlier, if you lose your paper, everything's gone, and there's no forget my password, or there's no MasterCard number you can call to say, hey, this is a fraudulent transaction. With virtual blockchains, there's somewhere you can call, and it's the service provider that uses that chain, and you can say this is illegitimate, and they would be able to reverse the transaction for you without breaking the immutability of your network. You would have new transactions later on, just sending your value, sending whatever, correcting the error, and this would stay in the blockchain. The correction would stay in the blockchain forever, but you will still have somebody could help you, and this has a lot of value for corporations and when you're dealing with customers.
Perfect. So we're running out of time, but we're going to take 3 questions from the audience. Who would like to start? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been hearing around, especially from governments, that they don't believe in the future of cryptocurrencies, but they do believe in the technology. So what do you have to say to that? Because you hear that a lot. There's a financial case and the non-financial. Are they referring to the non-financial cases or use cases of blockchain? They say they believe in the technology. They don't want to hinder it, but they want to regulate and kind of ban cryptocurrencies.
So yeah, I would say it's hard not to believe in cryptocurrencies because you don't have to believe they're there. I think what they should focus more on is just see them. What bothers them is the anonymity of it and the unregulated market. So the fact that the exchanges get hacked all the time, and the fact that the exchange's owner are like 4 people in a garage. I used to have an exchange with this guy's father back then, and that was a standard. 3 developers and just starting an exchange, and I would more tackle that because on a tax standpoint and then on a legal standpoint, they don't recognize it as cash. And the thing with cash paper bills is there's many similar properties where you don't know where it comes from, but you still use cash, and they have no problem with cash. They have all legal frameworks that adapt to that reality that you don't know where the cash comes from. So I think, yeah, they should just try to make parallel with cash more.
So yeah, when we are talking about governments, really like an abstract concept, and there are so many different governments and different countries, and even in one country there are many agencies and government representatives that could be many different things and contradict each other, and at the end there are many individuals that give their own opinion. So we heard a lot that sometimes what is interesting in the technology, but it's not the currency. It's mainly bank central, and we have this guy recently that made those comments that should not work on creating our own money, but work on blockchain. So I don't think for me that it's necessarily something that makes sense, because especially for big blockchain, you need the currency aspect, and as today, Bitcoin as the currency is the main use case of blockchain, and it's definitely something that is gonna stay. And many government and agency, they consider that as something that's gonna stay, and they don't necessarily have any problem with that. So obviously, they want to make sure that it's not used to illegal, or it's not used to stuff that they don't want the currency to be used of, but they don't necessarily are angry, or they don't necessarily have a problem. And even in some country, you can pay your tax, with cryptocurrency, and there are some statutes. So I think the sense with time is gonna be like it's gonna be something that neither they want it or not is gonna be accepted after they're gonna build a framework around it, and temporarily they can encourage people to work on something else. But I think it's more a personal decision. If you want to work on crypto because it interests you, you can work on crypto. If you believe that technology is more important, you can work on the technology.
So I do a lot of work with government, both in Quebec and at the federal level, and I've given lots of talks to lots of different agencies, and I've been told exactly what you said lots of times, right? I have the conference call before, and they're like, okay, we want you to come, but don't talk about Bitcoin, right? Just talk about blockchain. And so for me, the answer is very simple. It's just the optics of it. They read about Bitcoin. It's associated with Silk Road and drug trafficking and money laundering, whatever. And so they just don't like the optics of it. They have no problem if you show up and talk about Ethereum. Ethereum does everything Bitcoin does. it has a currency, Ether, that's built into it. It's exactly the same as Bitcoin. Plus, it does all the dApp stuff. Government uses Ethereum. Bank of Canada did an experiment using Ethereum for their large value transfer system. NRC has an Ethereum project where they're logging the money that they're spending in terms of transparency. And so, yeah, from my perspective, talking to them, it's just they just don't like the optics of Bitcoin. That's basically what it comes down to.
Perfect. We'll take 2 more questions. Yes.
Yeah, I want to take the opportunity to get back to non-financial cases. That's my area of expertise. And I tell you, I don't make money with that. Just to let you know, if you're planning to do that, just don't do it. I believe that blockchain as a database, magic database, is the opportunity to create a new economy, the internet of value. And part of that, why don't we measure happiness? That would be a good idea. You know, at the city level, we talk about like local currencies and so. And I developed a prototype, so just a prototype at the moment, in the concept of a platform as a city, tokenized ecosystem with like cars, sending tokens and stuff. And the idea that you would get for 21 minutes of cycling, big C, you would get 3 tokens that are utility tokens that you could use for a coffee coin. So that's a story I tell at the moment. And I'm in touch with Montreal Smart City. But I believe this is the kind of scenarios we're getting into. Because good for you is good for the ecosystem. And then you just have that utility token that just has no value. So it's a prototype, so I'm very open to critique. So if you have any critique about the concept,
So
you're welcome.
So what's your question directly to the panel?
What do you think about that? Do you have any objection? Do you have any advice on how to push it?
So, in terms of, I mean, the research on happiness and happiness indexes, like, it has nothing to do with blockchain per se, but it's very interesting research and compelling, and so I think that's an interesting direction to look at. I don't have anything specifically to say. It's not in my expertise. I haven't looked at like sort of the smart city or the token economy or like those types of concepts. The only thing which you've probably already done is be aware that people have done this long before Bitcoin in terms of cash, right? Having tokens or greenbacks or like kind of private currencies that try and achieve these types of things. Some successful, some unsuccessful. So just make sure you learn the lessons that are there to learn from those systems.
Yes, in terms of happiness, I don't know. I can help you with that, and I don't know how related is it with the fact of biking or not. But in terms of the token, at the end you said that it's a utility token with no value.
No intrinsic value, just a messenger, and then you can attach some tokens and value and intrinsic value.
And yeah, you said you can buy some coffee or stuff like that. So that'll be interesting. The mechanism how you pass from one to the other. But if you can success to that, you could make a lot of money probably.
What I would do, what I'll do is just send you just tell you where to look at, because last year I worked with some folks that made an ICO, the first North American regulatory approved ICO called Impact Coin, and it's not exactly based on happiness, more for the green future, but the big C use case example could be covered with that. So I would give a look into that on what they did so far and what message they're sending right now and where they're going in the following years. That would be a recommendation for me, just to see how they're doing and maybe connect with them and see how you guys will synergize.
Perfect. So we'll take one last question from the audience. Yes.
I know both of you have a company, so I want to know like where you get the investment, and also for this kind of domain, compared to your past experience. So maybe the investors may be looking at different things and how to make profit with this blockchain activity. So where do you think they are looking at, or you are looking at?
So just so I'm clear about the question.
So it's basically about the get funding and how to make money.
So what are investors looking into when if they want to finance a blockchain startup?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've had financing in Mantle. We closed a small round last Feb. Our investors are from Toronto, and it's been a weird time frame, I would say, over the past 8 months for the blockchain space in Canada, because there has been close to 30 filings for the TSX Venture and the Neo Exchange for blockchain companies getting public, or RTOs of other companies just grabbing, just stapling blockchain in their names, and their valuation would triple or quadruple over a couple of months. So it's been a weird time, but since March, things have slowed down, and the hype over all the investment banks and the different major family offices in Bay Street, at least, I'm not. That's the only thing I know. They have calmed down on the blockchain people. Now they're waiting for all those mining initiatives that they invested in to see how they unfold, because many of them had the expectation to install in Quebec and stuff. The mining scene is being a little bit stalled here for the past couple months. So all those people that raised in Q4 2017 are trying to get their way in. Does that answer the question?
So in our case, the investor is RCGT. So it's a special case, I think, and because the company has been created, just specifically for this case. But in more general way, I think, and finding investment is very easy and very difficult in the same time. Very easy because there are a lot of money, and definitely, VCs, they want to invest in blockchain, and they have a lot of money to invest. The difficulty is more to find some project to invest in. So it seems a paradox, but I mean by project I mean good project. So I think the challenge is more to present your project as good, but that is not specific to blockchain. I think let's come back at what we are saying about the challenge of blockchain for entrepreneurs. There are some additional risks, for VC in terms of reputation or legal risks. That the fact of using some blockchain or working. It's not true for every use case, but it's true for a lot of them. So that had some issue for them that makes the process of due diligence maybe more difficult, more expensive. But other than that, I think it's like for any other field. And in the blockchain, there are also more and more people they try to go to fund their own company without passing by VC. We see what's happening with the ICO. We see more and more security tokenized stuff that are more and more recognized in some jurisdiction as legal, so that could also be an option. Not necessarily the best to build a viable project, but it could be an option if you want to raise some money.
So I don't have a company, but I'll just pick up on a few things that my colleague said. So one thing that Pascal said, he mentioned impact finance and said it in about one sentence, but I think it's worth fleshing out a bit, is a lot of ways that you would raise capital traditionally, whether it's through public or through banks, would require financial reporting. And financial reporting is very, very difficult in today's climate, and that's a big roadblock for entrepreneurs. So if you're working with venture capitalists and things like that, you might not be required a financial report. But Pascal's at EY and Vincent's at Raymond Chabot, and so these are accounting firms, and accounting firms are really hesitant today. I can say this because I'm not at one of them. To go into companies and try and audit them. So this is a project that we're looking at in terms of AMF. AMF is actually I won't say it, but there could be financial authorities that are a little frustrated with the accounting firms because they might help create exemptions for certain financial reporting, but when it comes time for annual reports, and we have to check and see whether this Bitcoin trust fund actually has the Bitcoin in the bank or in the safe or whatever, and these types of things, they sort of back out, right? And so that to me is a really key core challenge in terms of it really limits your options when you're looking to raise capital in the blockchain world. And this only applies when you have like crypto assets on your balance sheet. So if you're doing something that's using a blockchain but you don't have those assets on your balance sheet, then it's not particularly a problem. But anyway, this is a challenge that hopefully will get resolved in the next couple of years, but it's something to bear in mind.
All right. So, who here, by a show of hands, who here learned one thing that's new that they never heard about? All right, I think it's mission accomplished then, because there's so much to talk about. I think we can go on for ages continuing to talk about all the discussions and the exciting stuff that are coming up. So 2 things I want to mention. The first thing, thank you so much for our panel members for being here. So big round of applause. And second thing, so for those of you that don't know District 3, or this is the first time that you're coming to this, so because you came to this event, you're going to be getting a newsletter with all the upcoming events. We organize events on social innovation, blockchain, artificial intelligence, life sciences, a lot of exciting things for you to get to know people that are interested in these kinds of technologies. But more importantly, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to build a startup, or even if you're already in the market and you're looking to scale your startup, at District 3, one of the things that we offer, by the way, is it's free, it's open to everyone. We don't take intellectual property, we don't take equity, we don't charge any fees. And we work with all types of startups and all sorts of technologies. And I think a lot of our entrepreneurs, what they say that they really benefit from District 3 is the coaching. So we have a team of coaches that have built successful businesses in the past with over 250 employees. Their businesses got acquired, and they're really there not as your investor, not as someone who's going to be sitting on your board as a startup, but they're really there to help support and guide you throughout the process. And we really encourage you, if you're ever looking to get that kind of support, come and talk to me. There's also Jeremy over here that is also part of District 3, so if ever you have any questions about what we do here. And of course, Catallaxy is doing amazing stuff with blockchain startups, so make sure to talk to Vincent. And one last thing, Pascal, so Mantle is, funnily enough, one of our the co-founders of Mantle is Sean Cullen, and he used to be a staff member at District 3. And currently, you know, what we do at District 3 that's quite unique is the fact that we bring together students and people that have different expertise, and we have our startups get mandates on some of the challenges that they're facing. So within 3 months, they're able to test different theories that they might have about what they're building on, and the students, on the other hand, are getting all this kind of amazing experience where they're learning and you know, seeing how real-world applications of some of the things that they're learning about. So if you want to learn more, check out our website, d3center.ca, and I hope you enjoyed this evening, and I hope to see you in the space for some of you that are new, and for those of you that I see often, please continue to come to District 3. It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much. So if you guys want to network, you can always go to the common area, or speak to the speakers if you have any questions.
So,